What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It's the Raw Prospect Podcast. Welcome back. It's episode 145. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today is Monday, January 23rd. Today we're recapping all the divisional round games, uh, starting with the first to the last, going through all the key matchups, then closing out the show with our first basketball segment in a while. We're going to go through the Eastern Conference teams and put the teams into tiers, um, starting from championship contenders all the way down to the bottom feeders. But joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Wing. What's up?
What is up, everyone? Episode 145. Excited to bring it to you on this Monday night. A crazy Monday night at that. But we are officially in Conference Championship Week, which is exciting. Two great matchups. I know this time of year can be a little weird because it feels like we only have now 3 football games left before there is no football for a span of about 6 or 7 months, which is sort of sad. But at the same time, I really do believe these conference championship games that we're not going to break down today. That'll be a later episode this week. But I really do believe we got 2 really, really, really good matchups. The AFC being a rematch of last year, exactly, Cincinnati at Kansas City. And then the NFC is what we've pretty much been anticipating since like September, when we really got a feel for who the teams were in the NFC. But what we did not anticipate is that it would be Brock Purdy in this situation. But we'll talk about those games later this week, along with possibly another basketball segment. Haven't decided if that's either going to be the Western Conference tiers or a college basketball segment. That's to be announced later. But today, we're bringing basketball to you as well with our Eastern Conference tiers. And I, surprisingly, did prep for this episode. And I did prep for the last episode. So I'm trying to get in a groove there. So without any further ado, one more announcement. My Texas mini series, I'm going to start that hopefully tomorrow night with a live stream right after the Texas-Oklahoma State basketball game. It's going to be a mostly football concentrated episode. I'm going to break down the 2 big additions in the transfer portal, particularly A.D. Mitchell. I've had a lot of time to digest that, digest these additions to the football team, and I think I can provide you guys with some great perspective as someone who's been in touch with a friend who actually works for the football team, and then also a guy who's just constantly on Orange Bloods and the recruiting sites and all that sort of stuff, reading up on this. I have some really good stuff that I want to talk about, along with recapping Texas so far in conference play in basketball. So that should be good. So look out for that. With Rodney Terry as head coach now, not Chris Beard.
Yeah,
So
I just want to,
go ahead.
right before we get started, just real quick, I just want to give a shout out to my Bethany College Swedes who just beat the number 2 team in the country. The men specifically, I just left that game. The women won as well. It was a big night. But yeah, let's get into this. Starting with the first game of the weekend, Jacksonville at Kansas City. This one, man, what a weird arc to this game this was. Honestly, this game felt like it was in the balance early on when the stretch where Chad Henne was in the game. Patrick Mahomes got injured early, high ankle sprain, and Chad Henne went in the game on his own 5-yard line, drove the Chiefs down the field, got a touchdown, extended the lead, and that to me what made all the difference in the game. I'm interested to see your perspective. What do you think?
Well, first of all, from a Jacksonville perspective, um, I think the most important takeaway that you can take into the offseason after a fantastic year, I mean, the midseason turnaround going from 2-6 to, I believe, 9-8, winning your last like 5 games going into this and the wild card game. So you were on a 6-game winning streak coming in. You were one of the hottest teams in football. I think the main takeaway is like you got a taste of it. Now you have some young building blocks, but I think the most important thing is you have your coach and you have your quarterback. And that's what's most important. I think Doug Peterson is a long-term coach. I think he's fantastic. I think he deserves at least to be in the conversation for Coach of the Year, but we can have that awards conversation at a later time. Um, and I think that Trevor Lawrence, based on the progressions that we saw with Doug Peterson as his coach, there were some hiccups along the way, and there certainly still will be. He's still a very young quarterback. But I think there's a lot to be excited about in Jacksonville. And a lot of the money that they spent in the offseason on those weapons that they got for Trevor Lawrence, while we had some questions about did they overpay here, did they overpay there, I think Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, the guys that they went out and got, I think they've really paid off, and they have some really great things to build on. They have an athletic front defensively, but that's really the main takeaway, I think, for Jacksonville. And you made a great point. I mean, Mahomes gets hurt, and Jacksonville hung around for a while. They're a really like gritty, tough team. And I think you have a lot to look forward to. But to me, the real difference for Kansas City was their defense in the second half. It seemed to me like the young secondary, which I don't think we talked a whole lot about for Kansas City in our preview episode, was really the difference maker for them in the second half. They had like 3 or 4 rookies, I believe, playing in the secondary, which I didn't even realize really until I was watching the game. But McDuffie, who's been playing in the slot, was fantastic. He allowed 2 catches for 21 yards and 45 coverage snaps on Saturday. He was absolutely great. And Jalen Watson, their 7th-round pick rookie, he had a huge interception, and he played fantastic. And then L'Jarius Sneed, for the most part, I thought did a pretty admirable job following Christian Kirk wherever he went. I think it was the plays that the young Kansas City secondary made in that second half, and the coaching and some of the adjustments made by Steve Spagnuolo was really the difference. And I think Frank Clark and Chris Jones continue to kind of control what was happening up front. They were getting some pressure and affecting Trevor Lawrence in a way that I think really won them this game. But really the difference when you look at the final score was that 98-yard drive orchestrated by one Chad Henne. And the last point I'll make is the running game for Kansas City. I think now that Mahomes likely won't be 100% going into next week against Cincinnati, not that we're going to preview that game now, but I do think that in order to beat Cincinnati next week, they're going to need a similar performance on the ground like they got on Saturday against Jacksonville. 30 carries for 144 yards. They stuck with it, and they ran the ball very effectively. Pacheco was great. Their other guys were fantastic. And then one more thing, what we brought up about Jacksonville struggling throughout the season to cover the middle of the field, and to what I brought up about their struggles covering tight ends, that just continued to play itself out. So they're going to need to figure out a way to fix that issue over the offseason. But that's really what it came down to for me.
Right. Yeah. And this game, Jacksonville had a lot of chances. That's the one thing that I remember most from this game is they had a lot of chances in the fourth quarter to tie this thing up. And I don't really put it on Trevor Lawrence. I don't really put it on anyone in particular, but the Chiefs defense really stepped up, and sorry, that's just not what I was really expecting going into it. I was thinking, this Chiefs offense has the better matchup over this Jaguars defense, and that would be where they won the game. But it was really this defense that really impressed me. You mentioned that secondary, that young secondary. They've gotten better week over week over week. If you look at what they were doing early in the season, particularly in that Bills game, I think it was week 3. And you look at what they're doing now, it's night and day. Tight man coverage. Kansas City's able to blitz and trust these defensive backs to cover on the back end and trust them to hold up. And that gives Steve Spagnuolo the ability to do whatever he wants as a defensive coordinator. That gives him a lot of options. And then from a Jacksonville perspective, on the defensive side of the ball in particular, I thought the pressure that Jacksonville was able to generate wasn't quite what it needs to be to close this game out, to really close the gap. I think they have a lot of athletic players on the defensive line, but particularly Trayvon Walker, can't think of his name, Josh Allen, and then the guy they picked up from San Francisco last year. They're all extremely athletic, and they were able to keep Patrick Mahomes in the pocket. Obviously, the injury played a part in it, but converging the pocket from keeping him inside of it and having everything close in, it really takes its toll on the quarterback's accuracy and his ability to step up in the pocket. So I thought they did a great job of that, but they just couldn't get the sacks at the end of the day. And they really needed those negative plays to really make the difference defensively. So the front seven, or particularly the front four, they can build from within here moving forward. I think a couple moves here and there, maybe a linebacker, maybe a safety, like a tight end covering specialist, would be fantastic for this team. But they're close. I think, out of the teams in the AFC, they might have maybe the second or third's best odds to win their division next year, right up there with Kansas City. So that says a lot about what they've been able to do to close this year out.
Yeah. The offseason, we'll be talking a lot more about that once it hits. We're going to do an offseason blueprint series for the teams. A little different than we did it last year, but you guys will see a lot more offseason discussion about what these teams need to do to take the next step. But I think the last point I should just make is, if Kansas City ends up beating Cincinnati next week somehow, and goes on to either be in the Super Bowl or even win the Super Bowl, I think that drive by Chad Henne is going to be like the drive that I think a lot of us will end up looking back on. Like, that was really key in terms of, because it felt like at that point the game was sort of hanging in the balance. But credit to Chad Henne doing what he needed to do, and credit to that running game for really just being consistent all day long. And they're going to need that sort of performance, I think, if they want to beat Cincinnati with a banged up Patrick Mahomes. But we'll talk about that later. Let's move on to what was a game that I thought would be a little closer than it ended up being. A divisional game, typically those are relatively close, but this just ended up being a talent mismatch. I mean, that's just the bottom line, in my opinion. It was just a talent mismatch basically at every single position group. You look at, I think, first of all, Jalen Hurts, right? He was the Jalen Hurts that we saw for most of the year. I think he looked relatively healthy, did a good job avoiding hits, getting out of bounds. And really, when he's able to run the ball, it just presents a different element. And this Eagles running game was downhill all day long, didn't allow a sack. The offensive line was dominating. They rushed for 268 yards and 3 touchdowns, one of which was on the ground by Jalen Hurts. His ability to run while also being efficient in the passing game was fantastic. He looked like the MVP candidate. It wasn't like a eye-popping performance on paper, but it was just really efficient. No turnovers. I mean, it was really good. They dominated up front, I think, on both sides. You look at what they did defensively with that front seven. 5 sacks. It's the first time ever the Eagles have had 5 sacks in a playoff game. That's an interesting stat that I read. You look at what they did. Hassan Reddick had 1.5 sacks. Sweat had 1.5 sacks. Fletcher Cox had a sack. Brandon Graham had a sack. And Daniel Jones was under duress pretty much the entire game. Faced 26 pressures on 35 dropbacks, 64% of the time. Only Russell Wilson, since ESPN started tracking pressures in 2009, has faced a higher pressure percentage in a playoff game than Daniel Jones did in that game on Saturday night. That's how dominant that Eagles pass rush was. And it was just, in my eyes, a talent mismatch at pretty much every single position, especially in the trenches. But for the Giants, I think you have a lot to look forward to. I mean, going from 4-13 to, what was it, 9 wins, getting to the divisional round in Brian Dable's first year. In my opinion, probably should be coach of the year, but there's arguments to be made for others as well. I think you got to go for it this offseason. Now that you've seen like Daniel Jones is not him, but he can be your guy. Like he can get you to the playoffs, win you some playoff games under this system with Brian Dable, with some extra talent added throughout the offseason. You've been drafting well the past couple of years, in my opinion. Maybe some additions to that secondary. I think the Giants have a lot to look forward to going into the offseason. The bottom line, I think, is you're a little bit ahead of schedule now if you're a Giants fan. And this was a team that I think overachieved based on our expectations coming into the season, but you're ahead of schedule. And I think, just continue to build off that.
Right. This Eagles team is fantastic from top to bottom. I think Jalen Hurts played a fantastic game, getting the ball out quickly. He was seeing the field extremely well, was extremely accurate. And this team closed the year out slowly, but I think got focused, needed that bye week to get healthy again and reset a little bit. And now they're right back to playing how they were to start the season. And that's scary for the rest of the league, not just the NFC, the league. Because this team is going to be a tough out for anybody in Philly or not. They're going to be really tough to beat. One thing I thought was interesting was the engine at wide receiver, A.J. Brown, all season long, only had 4 catches for 40 yards, I believe. They didn't really need to even feed him the ball. They had all their other guys step up to the plate. Devontae Smith was fantastic, was so good after the catch. It was a complete mismatch the entire night. And I'm really excited for the NFC Championship. That's all I'll say. But do you have anything else to say about this game?
No, I think I completely agree with you. The Eagles, there were a lot of people, and we talked about this while the game was going on, that I think were sort of doubting the Eagles coming in and whether or not they were actually a legitimate team during like the last couple weeks of the season, doubted their strength of schedule in particular. And I think they just proved that when they're healthy, they are a freight train and they're coming downhill. And if you can't match up with them, and their physicality up front on both sides, you have no chance. No chance. And so I think, and when Jalen Hurts is healthy, it just adds another component because he's able to run. And when he's efficient in the passing game, which is hard not to be with Devontae Smith, with A.J. Brown, with Dallas Goedert, with every component they have within that offense, it's just in the running game, when the running game is working like that and you have, Kenneth Gainwell as like an emerging depth piece at running back, the 5th-round pick out of Memphis. It's just, there's so much versatility, and they're sort of similar to the Niners in a way, and I think that's going to be a fantastic game.
Yeah, it's going to be a battle. But let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals taking down the Buffalo Bills in a rout. To put it simply, they dominated this game from start to finish. I'll start off with my analysis, I guess. The Bills seemed like they were stuck in the mud the entire night. Just particularly their high-level defensive players. I've never seen them play and attack the ball so, I don't want to say slowly, but it just felt like the Bengals were playing at a different speed the entire night. And part of it makes me wonder if, the snow didn't play in their favor, but I can't really make that excuse for them because they play in Buffalo. That's part of playing January football in Buffalo. And it didn't go their way. And it raises a lot of questions going into the offseason. But particularly, I just think this team, you don't need to question the heart of this team. This team has a lot of high quality players, but they need the flash. They need the lightning in a bottle that can close out a game, that can take over a game, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I think in that pass rush, that's the type of things that they thought Von Miller would give them before he got injured, and he was giving them, to be fair. But I just think they need playmakers, guys who have a nose for the ball, who can find a way to get turnovers in big moments. And not to say they don't have those type of guys in the building, but the fact is they just weren't able to get it done on Saturday or Sunday. And then the other side of the ball, how can you not give all the credit to this Bengals offense and their defense as well, obviously? But I'll start off with the offense. Joe Burrow, man, just the thing that stands out is, the numbers aren't out of this world. They're not, jumping off the page by any means. I believe he only had, or not only, but he had 243 yards. But every time the Bengals needed a play, he did it. Like, he got it done. And that's what makes him special. That's his special quality that puts him as an elite quarterback in this league. In my opinion, the 1B to Patrick Mahomes is 1A when both are playing at their best, in my opinion. And this offensive line, you just completely quieted all the doubts that everyone had before this game. They dominated. It looked like the weak offensive line going into the game would have been the Bills. They dominated up front in the run game, the pass game. It didn't matter. It was all them the whole night. And then defensively, I'll keep this quick. I think this defensive line is incredibly underrated. They don't have the flashy guys per se, the Micah Parsons or the, Nick Bosa, for example, but the way they work in tandem and the way they um, communicate as a pass rushing unit to keep these mobile quarterbacks in the pocket. We saw it the whole night. Josh Allen wasn't able to escape the pocket and make those plays outside that he always able to do. Even when they play the Chiefs, it's the same thing. They keep these they keep these opposing quarterbacks inside the pocket. That's one of their best qualities, in my opinion. And then that in tandem with this secondary makes them a top top five defense. And man, this team is unbelievable, man. I'm just excited because in the AFC Championship, NFC Championship, there's no Super Bowl that's not gonna be fantastic. There's no Super Bowl matchup that I wouldn't be excited for at this point, and that's all you can really ask for as an NFL fan.
Yeah. I have a lot to say about this game. I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. Number one, first of all, this was 27-10. This was a 3-possession game, but it felt like more than that. It felt like the only real chance that the Bills had was like that first drive when they orchestrated that first drive in the second half, went down and I believe scored a touchdown. Or I don't remember.
A field goal
Field
to make
goal
it
to make it
17-10.
17-10. They were within 7, and with everything that it seemed like had gone wrong for the Bills to that point, you just felt like you were a great Josh Allen quarter away from possibly flipping that game on its head. Maybe a turnover by your defense and a great 5-minute stretch or 10-minute stretch of Josh Allen away from winning that game. But Cincinnati went right back down the field, scored a touchdown, extended it to 2 possessions. And aside from that, like particular moment in the game, Buffalo was outplayed in basically every aspect. I mean, from first snap to last snap, Cincinnati had more first downs. They were way better on third down. Buffalo really couldn't stop the run. Their offensive line was horrendous. Josh Allen looked confused, really out of rhythm all game, didn't get a rhythm at all. We saw frustration from Stephon Diggs at the end of the game. He stormed out of the locker room. That's a whole other story for another day. I mean, it was just frustration all day for this Bills offense. And for me, and I think Colin Cowherd pointed out something fantastic that I agree with. For me, the Bills, I do think their offensive line needs a little bit of a revamp. I don't think it's the greatest. I think it could be better. And I think it would help them to either go offensive line in the draft or go out and make some moves in free agency for a couple offensive linemen. I just feel like they need a refresh on that offensive line. Because to me, for most of the season, and I had Buffalo basically start to finish winning the Super Bowl, and I was consistent with that. But the problem with Buffalo this year, aside from some of their injuries that they sustained early on defense, like Von Miller and like Micah Hyde, that could have certainly helped them. Not losing those players would have, I think, made a big difference. But you can't, if you're the Bills at this point, you really can't use that as an excuse. To me, I just think Buffalo, aside from like occasionally like making big plays down the field when they're in favorable conditions, they just lack a consistent identity offensively. I feel like their identity all year was, and look, when you have a quarterback as talented as Josh Allen is, I mean, I don't blame them necessarily, but I do blame them because in the playoffs, you look at the teams that are left, and I feel like they all have an established offensive identity, something they do really, really well. For San Francisco, it's obviously their offense is predicated on a strong running game and that passing game, the short to intermediate play action passing game. The Eagles, same thing, running game, zone reads, that sort of thing. I feel like Kansas City, when Mahomes is healthy, it's Travis Kelsey, and I just feel like these teams that are left they either have a really concise game plan offensively going game to game, or they have like an identity, established identity offensively. And I feel like for the Bills to get to the point, it's been, Josh Allen, you're incredibly talented, be Superman and save us most of the time. And I just don't feel like that work. It can work in the regular season because most Sundays you're going to have the more talented. I mean, this is still a really talented Bills team. There are holes to fill, certainly, I think. But most Sundays in the regular season, you're going to have the more talented team and you're going to have the more talented quarterback. You're going to win those games. But come playoff time, it hurts you to just rely solely on your quarterback to be Superman every single time. And that's just how I feel about the Bills from an offensive standpoint. From a defensive standpoint, as I said, they really didn't have the pass rush I think they needed to affect Joe Burrow in the passing game, and give credit to Zach Taylor. I think he's sort of, over the last 2 or 3 months of this season, I think he solidified his, even though they went to the Super Bowl last year, I still had some doubts about Zach Taylor as a coach. But this year, I feel like he's really like established himself as an excellent offensive game planner. In that Cincinnati, they came out just a lot of short, quick throws, zone running game. Joe Mixon looked fantastic. Samaje P. Ryan, et cetera, et cetera. Get the ball to your playmakers and let them make plays. And that's where Joe Burrow excels. Timing patterns, being accurate. He's extremely accurate, extremely smart, not going to make many mistakes. And you really, I think Zach Taylor drew up the perfect game plan to sort of help this banged up offensive line with those short to intermediate quick throws, letting your elite receivers make plays after the catch. And so give credit where credit is due to this Bengals coaching staff, especially their defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, who has been really, really good this year. And I think if he continues on this role that he's on, could eventually get into the consideration for a possible head coaching job. I think he's that good. Obviously, you think of, there are some names on that Cincinnati defense. I mean, Trey Hendrickson's a guy. Jesse Bates is a guy. DJ Reader, I think, is a guy. But the underrated X factor to me has been Mike Hilton, their slot corner. I know a lot about him because he played 5 or so years in Pittsburgh. He's kind of a do-it-all Swiss Army knife in that secondary. He blitzes off the edge, been excellent in coverage in the slot. He's sort of the queen on the chessboard, so to speak, in that secondary for the underrated guy, the unsung hero, in my opinion, for this Bengals defense. And he does whatever he's asked to do within this defense at, I think, a very high level. And I think that should be mentioned. I think Lou Anarumo, from a defensive game planning standpoint, and Zach Taylor from an offensive game planning standpoint, just completely outcoached the Bills. And I think the Bills need to establish more of an identity and sort of revamp their offensive line a bit going into the offseason.
Yeah, and before we move on, I just want to reiterate one thing, is just that it's not panic time in Buffalo.
No.
Not right now. Not yet. You still have Josh Allen. You still have a lot of these guys under contract. You may not have cap space. You have -5 cap space going into this offseason, but there's a lot of ways you can make the space to make the moves you need. And you're close. You're not that far away.
No.
And a couple injuries here and there don't happen, and this is a completely different ballgame. I truly believe that.
Right.
And to your point of Josh Allen being a Superman, the Bills have the 30th rushing attack in the
Yeah.
NFL outside of Josh Allen's run game. So I think it's been 5 years of, or I think it's been 3 years of great play from Josh Allen, and all 3 of those years they've failed to develop a consistent running game, and that um, really points itself to that offensive line failing to create push, because I believe their running backs have talent. It's not like their running backs are bums. That's not the case.
I don't know what the Bills' coaching situation is particularly. And I don't particularly think this guy's scheme, based on what I've seen throughout his coaching career, would fit as like a offensive coordinator in Buffalo, because I think Ken Dorsey does a fantastic job, and I'm not sure this guy's scheme would fit the offense that they want to run around Josh Allen. But if you could bring in a guy like Greg Roman just to be like your run game specialist or something,
Right.
because we've seen what he does. Like he's a fantastic. He was just let go by Baltimore after a really fantastic career in Baltimore. He really develops run games very well, and I think. I mean, you have guys at running back. I don't think it's a running back issue. I think it's more of an offensive line lacking the like scheme and the commitment to the running game that's hurt Buffalo. And so if you can revamp that offensive line a bit and get a guy who knows how to develop a running game and scheme the running game, I think that could help Buffalo a bit. So I think if I were the Bills, I don't know, how the coaching hiring works and how many spots they have and that sort of thing and what they're looking for. But if you could bring in Greg Roman in a particular role as like an advisor to the offensive coordinator to sort of help develop a running game, because it seems like Sean McDermott and this coaching staff has really struggled with that, even when they had Brian Dable. I think that would really benefit the Bills.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a really good take that I didn't even think about, but that would be a perfect fit. But let's move on here to the last game, Sunday night. The game that I've dreaded talking about. The game featured on the thumbnail. San Francisco 49ers taking down my Dallas Cowboys in the most excruciating way possible. I'll start just by saying this. The hate towards Dak Prescott right now, just on Twitter in general, it's overdoing it a bit. But I will say this: he played horrible this game. That's just the facts. He played horrible this game, but he's not a terrible quarterback. That's just flat out wrong. And you know, there were, different moments in the game that played a part in this loss. There's a lot of moments you can point to, but the fact is, going into it, I mean, the 49ers were the better overall roster. The Cowboys winning this game would have been an upset. That's the bottom line. So, everybody knew that going in, and then, the game happens and Dak throws 2 picks, and then it's like, oh, Dak sucks. He can't do anything. Blah 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 blah. That I don't understand that really. But for the game itself, having some time to think about it, I just got to tip my cap to the defense. The defense played fantastic the whole game. It really kind of reared its ugly head when, the Cowboys had that 3 and out. They made it 12. After they made it 12-12, they got the ball back and then had a 3 and out. And then the 49ers went straight down the field, burning, I believe, 6 or 7 minutes off the game clock. And that was the drive that won the game. Just because the Cowboys just couldn't generate the offense to respond after that. And I got to give credit to Kyle Shanahan. I think 2 or 3 years ago, he wouldn't have managed the game at the same level he did today. He's in years past fallen into the trap of, oh, we have these matchups on the outside. We can find these 30-yard big chunk plays down the field if we keep throwing the ball. But um, he knew that if he did that, then it would have given the Cowboys the opportunity to pin their ears back and rush the passer. And for a young Brock Purdy, that would have not went well, most likely. And Kyle Shanahan, to give him credit, he knew that, and he completely schemed everything around that, from clock management to everything in between, just running the football over and over and over again, and then just throwing it when you need to, just when the opportunity presents itself. I think that management of the game and sticking to the running game, even when the Cowboys were playing aggressive run defense, I think that's what won the game for the 49ers.
I did a lot of prep for the other 3 games. I had notes prepared for the other 3 games. I did not prepare any notes for this particular game because I wanted you to sort of drive the conversation as the fellow Cowboys fan on this podcast. I agree with you. I think the heavy criticism / hate towards Dak Prescott is a bit of an overreaction over the past 48 hours or 24 hours since the game ended on Twitter, on social media. But some of it is warranted. He didn't play his best game. The 2 turnovers weren't good, but it didn't particularly kill the Dallas Cowboys' chances of winning this game. It was just, to me, I felt like on that 49ers defense, I felt like the difference was I felt like their linebackers really made a difference in this game. Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner. Fred Warner in particular, he was shooting gaps in the run game, and then he was really taking away the middle of the field in the passing game. I felt like both of them did a really good job of that for most of the game. And Dallas really had to attack the edges. That's sort of what I saw. And so I felt like that was the X factor defensively for San Francisco. They got some pressure on Prescott. And in the second half, they really, it was fantastic defensive performance on both sides.
Right.
But it was really just that one drive, as you mentioned, from San Francisco made the difference. George Kittle made a couple key catches down the stretch. He's been a difference maker lately for that San Francisco offense. Brock Purdy he was far from perfect in my opinion, but he still avoided the big mistakes, which is fantastic for the San Francisco team moving forward. They have the team to do it, but I still think, and I picked them to go to the Super Bowl at the start of the playoffs, but it's going to be a challenge. I think going to Philly next week is going to be like a different challenge that in that environment, I don't think Brock Purdy has seen yet. It's been at home so far. Dallas was a step up in competition for sure defensively, and you'll see a similar pretty good defense in Philly themselves. But this road environment is going to be interesting for me, seeing how Brock Purdy manages that, because we know it's really hard to win in Philly, especially in the postseason. So those Philly fans, they're just something about them that is different. I believe, I think
Alcohol.
I think the NFC Championship game is first, so you won't have the prime time like under the lights, different like environment in Philly. But those Philly fans are still going to be drinking all day. They're still going to be rowdy, and it's going to be loud. So we'll see what happens. I think that's going to, as I said, it's going to be a great game. But for Dallas, um, it just wasn't. It just didn't end up happening. I know it's painful, but really losing Tony Pollard, I think, changed the game a little bit, and that sucks. It's unfortunate, but yeah, I think you still did an admirable job. Hung around, had your chances, but at the end of the day, just fell a little bit short. So that's pretty
Yeah.
much it.
I think with 4 minutes left, when the Cowboys had the ball, I texted you. It's put up or shut up time for Dak. That's what I sent to you at that moment, and it was. And it would have been tough to drive down the field in that moment and tie that game up, but um, that's what he's paid to do, and he wasn't able to get it done. That's just the bottom line. So we'll regroup towards next year, and I think the biggest thing this team needs to address is um, size on the defensive line. They need a run stuffer, a la DJ Reader. Maybe not, obviously the all pro level player DJ Reader is, but a run stopping specialist would be huge for this team.
Yeah, I agree with that. So with that being said, that's our divisional recap. We're about 45 minutes in. I don't know how you want to run this NBA Eastern Conference tiers segment that I'm pretty excited for. We're not going to be able to go super in depth on every single team just because of time constraints tonight. We will go way more in depth, I think, in basketball with a week off between the conference championships and the Super Bowl next week. And we'll have another basketball segment later this week that'll likely be college basketball, and we'll follow with the Western Conference tiers next week. But I have 5 tiers. I think it makes sense if we go bottom to top. I think addressing the bottom might be a
Right.
little quicker because we'll
I
have less
think
to
just
say.
rapid fire, little little tidbits here and there, give our thoughts, and then move right along.
Yeah, so
I think that's yeah.
I have 5 tiers in my list. I don't know how you split it up. I'll start with my bottom tier. I called it the Wimbayama sweepstakes / lottery. Um, and I have 3 teams in this tier. It's really the Pistons, the Hornets, and the Magic. I really don't have much to say other than congratulations, you are in the sweepstakes for getting a high lottery pick and possibly winning that first pick to get Victor Wimbayama, who uh, lots of teams at this point are wobbling for. So
Wobbling.
wobbling for Wimbayama is what I've called it all season long. So that's my first tier.
Yeah. I had the same exact thing as you. I didn't really give it a name, but I think Wembenyama sweepstakes describes it perfectly. They're in the hunt for Wembenyama. Um, One thing I'll say is Detroit was actually my pick to make the play in. And, it was a rough start to the year. And, clearly their timeline didn't match what I thought it was, given they made the move for Bogdanovich. And then once Cade Cunningham went down, it just really has gone downhill from there. But I think going this route may be um, beneficial in the end. And then Orlando, Paolo Banchero is fantastic. Franz Wagner is fantastic. They have a really, really nice young core there. And then Charlotte, it's been a disaster for Charlotte. I think they came into the season with the intention to compete, and it just hasn't gone their way in any sense. But let's move on. My next tier is the play-in contenders tier, and for me, that was Washington, Toronto, Chicago, and Indiana. And those are that I basically had that as the teams that are on the back half of the play-in, have a chance to get into the play-in, but will likely have their season cut short in the play-in. And as for each individual team, I don't have much to say about Washington. Porzingis has been good for them this year. I think um, that's the main thing you can take away. The injuries have kind of piled up, though, particularly for Bradley Beal, and that's a bit disappointing given what they're paying him. Um, then Toronto, it's been a little bit disappointing, but they've seen an uptick in offensive production these last couple of weeks, particularly from Fred VanVleet. He seemed to get back to his all-star level form that we saw from him last year, which is extremely good sign for the rest of the season. Then Chicago and Indiana. Um, Chicago, I think, um, will make the play in my opinion, given the high level talent that they have. They just don't have the depth to really go anywhere further than that. Then Indiana, Tyrese Halliburton is the truth. They're absolutely fantastic with the young core that they have built. And the fact that they're winning games is really a testament to former Mavs head coach Rick Carlisle. So shout out to them.
Yeah, I think the next two tiers, I think you could have flipped. I think we have potentially Atlanta and Indiana flipped. Personally, I know they've been without Tyrese Halliburton here for a stretch, but I gave Indiana that bump into my next tier for now, given what I've seen with a healthy Tyrese Halliburton. But that's really the only reason I did that. I do think there's an argument to be made for Atlanta. I just want to see more from Atlanta. They seem to have figured some things out here lately, but it had really been a struggle for much of the first 2-ish months of the season. And so I just want to see a little more from Indiana. DeJounte Murray the other day had some interesting comments about his time in San Antonio that I think was a little interesting. But that's another conversation for another day. But yeah, I mean, in 2 weeks, this could be totally flipped, and I'd have Atlanta with the good basketball they've been playing lately in that next tier up. But I have Atlanta in the likely play-in tournament bound tier number 4, which is what I called it. And then I have the other 3 teams that you have. Chicago, just not enough depth. They've been playing better basketball as of late, but it's a lot of here you go Zach LaVine, here you go DeMar DeRozan. They're near the bottom of the league in assist rate, which worries me. Not a whole lot of ball movement, but it seems to be working for them to an extent. Obviously, some of the other guys they have, we'll see how it all works out, but I just don't think they have enough depth. I worry about their bench. Toronto, Scotty Barnes really started slow this year, especially from a shooting standpoint, but he's gotten it going. He's figured it out sort of lately, and Toronto has improved over the past 2-ish weeks, I believe.
Mhm.
They're, what are they sitting at right now? 21 and 27. They're perfectly in that play-in range. And I think with Fred VanVleet, who has also been having sort of a rough shooting season, he's been averaging about 31 points and shooting a much better percentage from outside the arc in their last 4 or 5 games. And Scotty Barnes, the same thing. So I think limiting the turnovers will also be key for this Toronto team. That's something they've also struggled with, but they're right in that range, and I think they'll be a play-in team. And then Washington. I think the interesting part for Washington has been the Kristaps Porzingis, Daniel Gafford combo, front court combo that they've been going to the past month. They're actually 8-5 in the 13 games that Kristaps Porzingis and Daniel Gafford start, and they've been the second best first quarter team in terms of scoring and points per 100 possessions in the first quarter. when that combo starts. And they've been pretty good defensively as well with that combo. But Bradley Beal's been in and out of the lineup. And I just think at the end of the day, they'll be out talented and not have enough uh, um, scoring for that matter to really go further than the play-in. And then my next tier, I'll just go ahead and start on that. As I mentioned, Tyrese Halliburton, I think, deserves potentially like all-star game starter votes, in my
Right.
opinion, with how fantastic he's been. But we'll be breaking down our picks for the all-star game here maybe next week or the week after. But I think that's a conversation that certainly needs to be had. And when this Indiana team has been healthy, they have really sustained a level of success that I don't think a lot of us thought they would. I think Buddy Hield's been pretty good for them, pretty consistent. And then obviously Miles Turner, when he's been healthy, it's been great defensively. Still the same like rim protector that he's been in the past. And I think they'll be an interesting team to watch as the trade deadline approaches. Which way do they really go at the trade deadline if they get Tyrese Halliburton back here pretty soon? I feel like that could go a lot of different ways. The Knicks I have in that next tier. I worry about them a little bit defensively. They've really slacked off the past week or two defensively. They've struggled at points in times, but Jalen Brunson has been a much needed addition offensively. He's really an orchestrator in that offense. Um, and really the key for them will be Julius Randle and what they get from him offensively. But I think the Knicks deserves to be there considering the sort of semi-consistency they've had all year. And then my last team in this playoff caliber / potential dark horse tier is the Miami Heat. I want to see a little more from them going forward, and it'll be interesting to see what they do at the deadline. We know, obviously, when they get in the postseason, they could obviously be really dangerous and a pain to play in the first round because Eric Spoelstra is a fantastic head coach, because Bam Adebayo is a potential he's right in the mix for, I think. I mean, there are a lot of great – the problem is there's a log jam at the front court position in the Eastern Conference for All-Star Game starter, but I do think Bam Adebayo is right there for like potential argument to be made. If potentially one of these guys misses a whole lot of time leading up to the All-Star break, he's definitely going to be at the All-Star game. He's been absolutely fantastic for the Heat. Jimmy Butler, we know what he brings come playoff time. Tyler Hero's been great all year, pretty consistent. But I just want to see a little more from them going forward. They've been playing well lately. Give them credit for that. And in a month or two, or in a month, they could be in that next tier. But for right now, I just have them in that third tier as solid playoff team, but in potential dark horse, but not yet in that next tier with the teams that I'll mention here in a bit.
Right. For my next tier, that's where I had Atlanta and New York's in the New York Knicks in their own little tier as the teams that I feel confident will make the play-in, and will be most likely in the playoffs as that 7 and 8 seed, because I think the talent discrepancy between these two teams and the teams below them um, is pretty large in my opinion. And what Atlanta has shown lately, I think defensively has been really good. DeAndre Hunter, I think, has been solid, and getting him back and getting him healthy and acclimated and getting him in rhythm has been huge these last few months. And any type of consistency he's had in his career has completely been thrown off by injuries time after time, and you just hope that he stays healthy. Then John Collins, he's going to be the X factor for this team. We already know what DeJounte Murray and Trae Young bring to the table. But if John Collins can give them a consistent 18 and 8 a night on, efficient shooting, just to give them that front court, back court scoring balance, that would be massive for this team. And just being good enough defensively lately has been huge, and their offensive talent is there. They just need to put it all together, and they're starting to. I think by the All-Star break, you could see them really go on a little bit of a run from now until then. But I'll go into my next tier. Mention some of the teams you mentioned. My next tier is going to be the challengers tier or slash the dark horses tier. And that's where I'm going to have Miami, Cleveland, and Brooklyn. So I did end up putting Miami in a tier above what you put them. And the reason for that really is their play lately and what I know they're capable of. I think this is a team that will be making moves at the deadline to add more size, in particular. Um, sorry. And just getting some size in that front court. It just even with Bam Adebayo, as their main center, he's 6'9". He's a little bit undersized. Obviously, he makes up for that with all the other stuff he does. But having a bona fide 7-footer to guard some of these big centers like a Joel Embiid, or even try to match up with a Giannis Antetokounmpo, that will make a huge difference in this team's success. And we already know what they bring to the table defensively, and that culture that they have in Miami, and what Eric Spoelstra brings to the table as a coach. And then Cleveland, I think Cleveland is a team that will be extremely interesting to watch in the playoffs. I think how far they go will all depend on the matchups they have, and I think in particular, um, seeing them against a team like Milwaukee, for example, could be extremely interesting, just because of Milwaukee's struggles to score in the half court, and what this Cleveland team can bring to the table defensively to combat some of those Milwaukee struggles to really exacerbate them. I think matchups here and there like that could really be the difference in this team winning a playoff series or not. Um, Against a team like Boston, for example, that would be a horrible matchup for this Cleveland team, because of the wing talent that Boston brings to the table. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, obviously, and then the Cavs having a lack of wing depth in their lineup. It's a lot of small guards and bigs, for most of their lineup, and they've been able to make it work. And their defense is fantastic. I love what Donovan Mitchell has been able to bring to the table, and he's another X factor in the playoffs. Also, by the way, he always brings it in the playoffs, and you can't underrate that. Um, but I think this team ultimately, their ceiling is winning a playoff series and maybe getting a second round series to 6 or somewhere in that range. Um, then I have the Brooklyn Nets, um, who, in my opinion, the noise around them has been a lot more quiet since they've been winning. At the beginning of the season, you heard there was a lot of noise coming out that of that group, obviously for good reason with some of the drama that went on. But since then, before Kevin Durant got injured, you could argue Kevin Durant was in discussion for the MVP, and I would argue that he was top 3 right in the middle of that discussion before he got injured. And then Kyrie Irving has been fantastic as well, with what they've been able to do defensively in conjunction with that. This team will be a legit threat in the playoffs. No question about it. But I'll let you give your next tier.
Yeah, so this is where the discussion gets really fun, right? in my third tier, and I certainly agree with you. I agree with your premise regarding Miami. I just want to see a little more. That's all. I get it.
Mhm.
Great culture. The things I mentioned. I mean, you brought it all up as well. 2 weeks they could be in this next tier with the teams I'm about to mention. They're that one team that I think will fluctuate a lot depending on what happens over the next month before and after the All-Star break. Um, I have 5 teams left that I have to mention. I have tier one, which is my solidified title contenders. And then I have tier two that I call title threats, but I have either one concern or I think they're one trade away from potentially elevating into that next tier. Um, I agree with you on Cleveland. I think they are what I would say a title threat. I love their versatility, especially defensively. I think that their size is going to be hard to match up with. I know there are teams in the Eastern Conference that could potentially match up with them, uh, like a Milwaukee with Brook Lopez, with Giannis, like a potentially Philadelphia as well with Joel Embiid, a healthy Joel Embiid at that. But and look, Donovan Mitchell, before he sort of when he has a groin injury right now, which is a little bit concerning, and they've struggled a little bit. But I think Darius Garland has been fantastic lately, and weirdly, they've been a lot better when they've had one of the other, like one or the other playing and not both playing, especially defensively. But they've been much better than I thought defensively in the backcourt with Mitchell and Garland. Garland's been fantastic lately. And I just think they have a ton of versatility and switchability defensively, and their size is going to be a problem in the playoffs. Um, Isaac Okoro has been great as like a defender, and he's shooting the ball better than I think he's shot it since he's been in the NBA this year. But I agree with you, their wing depth is still a concern, and that's why they're in this tier and not that next tier. Um, and then I have the Bucks, and I get it. The Bucks with a healthy Giannis and a healthy team, and that's what we were really doing for this segment. Health considered, like assuming these teams are fairly healthy, um, then I think the Bucks probably by the end of the season will be in that legitimate title contender tier. But the reason I have them in this tier is particularly because Middleton. I'm I just as you mentioned, sometimes they struggle to score in the half court. And when it's not Giannis, who is it going to be in the playoffs? If Middleton isn't fully healthy and he hasn't been available for large parts of this season, he just came back tonight, and that's great. I want to see what the Bucks can do for an extended period of time with Middleton and Giannis, and I'm sure it'll be great if Middleton is healthy. But for a large period of the end of last season into the playoffs and a large portion of this season, Chris Middleton has struggled to stay on the court. And so I just want to see a little more from them when they're fully healthy. But I know that Giannis is right there, like in the mix again to be in the MVP conversation. And they'll get it together. They have the culture and everything that you need. But I want to see a little bit more from them in terms of half court offense and that secondary scoring, aside from Giannis. But their defense is great. Once again, they're third in defensive rating, and I'm sure by the end of the season they'll be right there with the legitimate title contenders. Should I go into my tier one, or do you want to switch back and forth here?
Go ahead and go into your tier one here.
Okay. Philadelphia was a team that I thought about a lot for this. But I elevated them into tier one just based on their play over the past month and a half. For the past 6.5 weeks, they've been playing really, really good basketball. They're 18-4 over the last 6.5 weeks. They've beaten some really good teams, had a great win over the weekend against Sacramento, in which they were down and they came back without Joel Embiid or James Harden. I think a lot of it right now in the regular season is how good are you without your best players? And that was a really encouraging performance. And I think with a healthy Joel Embiid, who now leads the league in scoring in terms of points per game, he's just above Luka Doncic right now as of tonight. He's right there also. I mean, the MVP conversation is just ridiculous right now. And then James Harden, who I want to see more of, the James Harden, Tyrese Maxey. Tyrese Maxey has also had some injuries, been on and off the court this season. They've really struggled with continuity, I think. It's hurt them with Embiid being out and Tyrese Maxey being out here and there. But I think Tyrese Maxey really taking that another step will be really a X factor in deciding whether or not how far the Sixers go in the playoffs. And obviously Harden is always a concern come playoff time. But I gave the Sixers the benefit of the doubt because of the way that they've played really consistent basketball for like the last month and a half. And I think that should be awarded. So I put the Sixers like on the fringe of the solidified title contenders along with the Nets, just because I think with the healthy Kevin Durant, when they were healthy with Jock Vaughn, since he took over, they were playing really good basketball. I think they could add some size still and some girth in that front court, whether that's through a trade or in the buyout market. I'm sure there'll be options there. But I do think with a healthy team and considering the play of Kyrie Irving, they just seem to have more energy on a nightly basis and also just better team chemistry ever since Jock Vaughn has taken over as head coach. And so I think they'll be right there come playoff time. And they have enough firepower, certainly, if, of course, they have a healthy Kevin Durant, who can be obviously the best player in any playoff series to win the championship. But there will be questions. And then Boston, they're the obvious one here. They're solidified. I have a little bit of a concern with Joe Mazzulla, but obviously, I mean, you don't have to do much coaching on this team. They had a little bit of a slump in like December-ish in terms of scoring and shooting, but Jason Tatum's right in the thick of things for MVP conversations. I feel like Jaylen Brown has really just been he's got there's something about him this year that I just really like. I think he's been more aggressive. I think there's a step up in intensity. When they've been playing with a healthy Al Horford and a healthy Robert Williams, their defense has been absolutely fantastic. They're great in the fourth quarter, especially defensively with their lineups when they go big with Robert Williams and Al Horford. And they're the only team to rank top 5 in offensive and defensive efficiency. Aside from that little mini slump in December, they've been really good all year. And Malcolm Brogdon has just been a delight to this team in terms of what he's added. He was a fantastic off-season pickup. I think Boston's the best team right now.
Okay. For my final tier, I did keep Milwaukee in there just because I know what they're capable of when they're healthy. But I definitely see why you want to, pause a little bit on that. You can kind of question, their perimeter playmaking outside of what Drew Holiday brings to the table. I think there is a few questions there, obviously, with some of the guys that aged out from that championship team that were big for them off the bench. And there's some questions there. There definitely is. But just the Giannis factor alone just gives me enough for me to say, you know, I can I can give a pass to some of the questions just because of what Giannis brings to the table and the matchup problems he presents to every single team in the Eastern Conference. Um, and then the other team is Philly. Philly was really the team that I was on the fence about in terms of
Same
putting in
here.
the title contender tier. I think um, you know, they're playing great basketball. You got to give them credit for that. Absolutely. Obviously, with, you know, guys in and out of the lineup, you know, but I got to see it in the playoffs. I've said this for years with Philly. I got to see it. And, you know, it's there for the taking. This conference is, it's not wide open, but it's there. And in order for them to, you know, really get the respect of the general public, and in my eyes, is they just got to go do it in the playoffs. And they won't be able to, you know, do that in the regular season. But you know, I do tip my cap to them for, you know, being able to weather the storm and play good basketball, and that does mean something. That's not meaningless. Absolutely not. That's why I have them in this tier. And then um my last team, the Boston Celtics, their resume speaks for itself. You know, there's questions there in terms of, you know, late in fourth quarters and just the mental side of things for this basketball team just as a whole. I think there's something to be said there. There seems like there was a mental battle they had to get over with Golden State last year more than anything. Um, they did just beat Golden State though, and I think that does mean something. As much as you want to argue, you know, the regular season doesn't mean anything. Regular season wins don't mean anything. But if you're if you're going to win a championship, getting a win against a team you're going to potentially play in the finals, a team that you lost to in the finals last year, that's a big mental hurdle that Boston had to climb, and they were able to do that. And they've been playing fantastic basketball. Offensively, they've been a juggernaut, and I think once the defense comes around, once they re-implement Robert Williams into the lineup and get back to the defense they were playing last year, this team will be the favorite to come out of the Eastern Conference.
Absolutely. Is there any last parting thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
I just want to revisit um, this our main, you know, disagreement, which was the Brooklyn Nets. I think rethinking it a little bit. I think I can definitely see the Brooklyn Nets coming out of the East, absolutely, and I'm honestly cheering for it. With all the noise that has been going on with Kevin Durant after losing to the Boston Celtics last year in the playoffs and getting swept the way they did, um, I'm really, you know, cheering for that. But um, I think they're a move away. I think ultimately they will have to make a trade to get a big to combat some of these elite bigs in the Eastern Conference, particularly Giannis and Joel Embiid. Without that, I kind of question their ability to guard straight up in those matchups. And there's going to be moments in those series, if they do play, where you're going to have to be able to guard straight up in crunch time and not come off of the shooters and double team. And if they're not able to do that, then it's going to be a really tough series to win. But I'm interested to hear your rebuttal on that.
No, I think we in the bigger picture largely see eye to eye. We just have a minor disagreement about where things stand right now. I mentioned that. In fact, I think we agree on the fact that they need more size if they want to actually win the Eastern Conference and come out of the East, match up with teams like Milwaukee, Philadelphia, even Cleveland for that matter, who has a bunch of size, like I mentioned. There are some that is a big concern, but I just feel like it's felt a lot different with Jock Vaughn as the head coach. For whatever reasons those might be, I don't know. I'm not inside the organization, obviously. But it's just there's been a certain level of energy I felt like with the Nets that I've seen, and I feel like their firepower it matches up with pretty much anybody when Kevin Durant is healthy, and I think Kyrie Irving is just he seems to be more bought in recently.
Right.
And obviously
Absolutely.
we've seen that can change pretty quickly if things start going downhill, and that is a little bit of a concern. But uh, you know, uh, there are. I mean, I think we largely think that if they get that right piece in terms of size, I think we agree that this team could legitimately like win the East, and I think I'm rooting for it as well. So that's sort of where I stand. I think we just have that minor, like, not necessarily a disagreement, but just like of where things stand right now. We just have a different way we're viewing the tiers, I think, is what it is.
Right. Right. Okay. That's gonna do it for episode 145. Obviously, I had a little typo in the title there. I put episode 150. I don't know why I did that. But that'll do it for episode 145. Like and subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And oh, if you want to support our channel further than just liking and subscribing, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/raw prospect podcast. We do bonus content over there. So if you're interested in that, we're going to have F1 content over there. We're going to have, some of the clips that you'll see on TikTok in the next few weeks are going to be made over there on the Patreon. So if you're interested in getting the long form content of that, then go subscribe over there. We'd really appreciate that. And with that, I'll let Michael sign us off.
Great episode. I think the prep that we've been doing for these past couple episodes goes a long way. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Couple things I will mention before I do the outro. Number one, be sure you check out my Longhorns mini series once it starts tomorrow. Sure, for people that are especially local to the Austin area, Texas, I think y'all will really enjoy that. Hopefully, I'd really appreciate if you check that out. And then number two, as Amy said, be sure to subscribe to all our social media accounts, our TikTok, our Twitter in particular. We're posting all our content. That's a really easy way to find it. You can also find us on YouTube and subscribe there as well, and any podcast platform, Spotify and Apple Podcasts being the main ones. So there are a lot of ways to find us now. We're continually looking for ways to innovate and improve. We've been sort of on a good like Monday, Thursday schedule during these NFL playoffs. I think we'll try to keep that going. So look for another episode to come out either Thursday night or Friday. I think will be around the time that happens. And then obviously we'll have a lot more basketball content coming your way next week in the off week from football. So before the Super Bowl. And then the next week will be likely all Super Bowl content. I think we can do some fun stuff with not only the game breakdown, but player props and stuff like that. That's always fun to do.
Right.
That's really the outlook moving forward here in the next 2 or so weeks. But with all that being said, enjoy your night. And just like the Jaguars, the Giants, the Bills, and the Cowboys, we are going, gone. Peace
Peace
out.
out.